The groan of metal against metal jolted me awake. I snapped my eyes open, the light filtering through the cracks in the corrugated iron roof, hardly enough to make out the shape of our shelter. This wasn't the usual creak of the wind. This was deliberate, rhythmic. Someone was trying to pry open the reinforced door. I rolled off my cot, the rusted springs protesting with a screech. I ran my tongue over my cracked lips, the familiar taste of rust a bitter composition. My hand reached for my weapon, a crude pipe pistol fashioned from scavenged parts. It was enough to make someone think twice before trying to take what little we had left. The scraping at the door intensified, followed by a low grunt of exertion. I pressed my back against the wall, my breath shallow and silent. Across the room I could hear Anya's breaths, her ribs still bruised from our last run. "Drask?" Her voice was a whisper. "Stay down!" I hissed, my eyes fixed on the door. "Grigor, wake up!" A snort followed by a series of heavy thuds told me Grigor was stirring. The big man lumbered to his feet, his bulk filling the cramped shelter like an ancient monument. He reached for his weapon, an improvised maul fashioned from a length of pipe and a concrete-filled head. It was brutal, devastating, and a perfect extension of Grigor's raw strength. The door buckled under another assault, the hinges groaning in protest. I motioned to Grigor, a silent order to brace himself. Anya scrambled back, her eyes wide with fear. The door exploded inward with a crash, splintering wood and twisted metal flying across the room. A figure emerged from the dust, silhouetted against the faint light of the rising sun. It was a man, his clothes ragged and his face hidden behind a mask. I raised my pistol, my finger tightening on the trigger. "Who are you? What do you want?" The intruder raised his hands, his eyes glinting behind the mask. "Peace," he said, his voice rough. "We come seeking shelter." I hesitated, my instinct screaming at me to pull the trigger. Trusting strangers in this wasteland was a death sentence, but the man's words and the fear in his eyes gave me pause. "Shelter?" Grigor rumbled, his voice thick with suspicion. "What makes you think we have any to spare?" The intruder gestured behind him. "There are others," he said. "Women and children. We are desperate." I lowered my pistol but didn't relax my grip. I exchanged a look with Grigor, who shrugged, his expression unreadable. "All right," I said, "come in, but make one wrong move and you'll be back out there before you can blink." The intruder nodded and stepped inside, followed by two figures who had been lurking in the shadows. One was a woman, her face gaunt and her clothes tattered. The other was a child, clinging to his mother's leg. I watched them warily, my hand still on my weapon. I knew this was a risk, but I couldn't leave them out there to die, not when they had a chance, however slim, to survive. "We'll share what little we have, but you work for your keep, understood?" The intruder nodded gratefully, his eyes filled with hope. It was a small victory in a world that offered few. The woman collapsed onto the floor, her legs giving out beneath her. The child scurried to her side, burying his face in her tattered dress. The man who'd spoken for them, his name was Rivik, as I'd soon learn, stood uncertainly, his eyes darting from one of us to the other. "Please," he croaked. "We haven't eaten in days." I nodded to Grigor, who grunted and moved towards a stack of crates in the corner. He heaved one open, revealing a meager supply of canned goods and dried rations. He tossed a can towards Rivik, who caught it with surprising agility. "Thank you," he murmured, his fingers tracing the embossed lettering on the label as if it were a sacred text. Anya stirred from her bed, her eyes still clouded with pain. "We need water," she said, her voice weak. "We can help with that," Rivik said. "We know of a well nearby." I looked at him skeptically. "How do we know you're not leading us into a trap?" He held my gaze. "You don't," he said. "But we need water just as much as you do. If we wanted to harm you, we could have done so while you were asleep." It was a fair point. I could see the desperation in his eyes. I knew that look well. It was the same look I saw in my own reflection every morning. All right, I said, pushing myself to my feet. Show us this well. We left the shelter, the rising sun casting shadows across the ruins of the city. Buildings were skeletal husks, their windows empty sockets staring out at the wasteland. Rivik led the way, his movements surprisingly agile for someone who claimed to be starving. He navigated the rubble with ease, his eyes scanning the surroundings for danger. The woman and child followed closely behind, their footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust that coated the ground. We reached the well after a short trek. It was hidden in a courtyard overgrown with vines and mutated weeds. A rusty hand pump jutted out from the ground, its handle worn smooth from years of use. Grigor stepped forward, his maul held loosely at his side. He tested the pump, his muscles bulging as he worked the handle up and down. A trickle of murky water dribbled out, followed by a steady stream. Anya produced a small metal cup from her pack and held it under the spout. She drank greedily, her eyes closing in relief as the water quenched her thirst. I took the cup from her and filled it for the child, who gulped it down eagerly. Then I offered it to the woman, who drank slowly, her eyes fixed on me with gratitude and suspicion. Rivik stood back, watching us with a guarded expression. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers twitched around the can of food he still held. He was wary, and with good reason. Trust was a comfort we couldn't afford in this harsh world. I handed him the cup, my gaze meeting his. "Drink," I said, my voice rough but not unkind. "We're all in this together now." He hesitated, then took the cup and drank deeply. As he lowered it, a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. It was a fleeting moment of humanity in a world that had forgotten what that meant. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its rays beating down on the cracked pavement. The well water, while brackish and slightly metallic, was a lifeline. We filled every available container. Rivik, his initial wariness slowly fading, told us their story in snippets as we worked. They were a family, once part of a larger group of survivors who had sought refuge in the ruins of an old factory complex. But raiders had attacked, leaving them with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a hope for a better tomorrow. "The city is a dangerous place," I said, securing the last water skin to my pack. "You'll need more than hope to survive." Rivik nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the twisted spires of the city centre pierced the hazy sky. "We know," he said quietly, "but we have each other." His words struck a chord within me, the bond of family, the shared struggle for survival. These were the only things that kept us going in this world. "We should head back," Grigor grunted, hefting his maul over his shoulder. "The sooner we're out of this open space, the better." We retraced our steps, the weight of the water slowing our pace. The sun beat down mercilessly, and the air shimmered with the heat. Anya lagged behind, her ribs aching with every step. "Damn sun!" Grigor grumbled, wiping sweat from his brow with a grimy forearm. "Feels like it's trying to cook us alive." Anya let out a pained cough. "Just a bit further," I encouraged her, offering a hand to steady her. "We're almost home." As we rounded a corner, a glint of metal caught my eye. Nestled between two crumbling buildings, a half-buried sign peeked out from the rubble. The faded lettering was barely legible, but I could make out the words Research Facility 09. "Look," I pointed. "Might be something useful in there." We approached the facility cautiously. Grigor tested the door, but it was jammed shut. He grunted in frustration, then stepped back and swung his maul with a mighty blow. The door buckled, then gave way with a screech of protesting hinges. We entered the facility. The walls were lined with shelves and cabinets, most of them empty or filled with broken glassware and scattered papers. We moved deeper into the facility, our flashlights cutting through the gloom. In a larger room at the end of a corridor, we found a bank of computer terminals, their screens dark and lifeless. Anya, despite her pain, was drawn to them like a moth to a flame. "I might be able to get them working," she said. "There could be information here, Maybe even schematics for weapons or tech. While Anya worked, the rest of us continued to explore. We found a laboratory filled with strange equipment, most of it too damaged to identify. But in the center of the room, on a pedestal, sat a strange object. It was metallic, roughly the size of a human head. "What is it?" Rivik asked. I reached out and touched the object, feeling a tingling sensation in my fingertips. "I don't know," I said, "but I don't like it." Grigor grunted in agreement. "Let's leave it. We've got the water, that's all we came for." But Anya had a different idea. "No," she said, her voice firm. "This could be valuable. We need to take it." I hesitated, torn between caution and the lure of the unknown. The object was clearly of alien origin, and who knew what secrets it held? Grigor shifted his weight, the maul creaking slightly in his grip. "I don't like it either," he rumbled. Anya shook her head stubbornly. "We can't just leave it. It's too... She struggled to find the right words. "Significant," she finally said. "It could change everything for us." I looked at Rivik, seeking his opinion. He was studying the object with fascination. "It's beautiful," he said softly, "but dangerous." The object was undeniably alluring, its patterns and its light drawing the eye like a moth to a flame. But there was a sense of something ancient and powerful, something that didn't belong in this world. "We need to decide," I said, my voice tight with tension. "Take it or leave it." The silence stretched out. I could feel the others' eyes on me, waiting for me to make the call. "I say we take it," Anya said, breaking the silence. "We're scavengers, right? This is what we do. We find things, we take them, we survive." Grigor grunted. "And what if this thing is more trouble than it's worth?" "We'll deal with that when we come to it," Anya retorted. "But we can't pass up this opportunity." I looked at Rivik again. "I agree with Anya," he said. "We have to take the risk." The decision made, we moved cautiously towards the object. Grigor, with his brute strength, carefully lifted it from its pedestal. We left the laboratory, the object nestled in Grigor's arms like a newborn child. We made our way back to our shelter in silence. Back inside our sanctuary, the pulse of the artifact seemed to amplify. I could see the worry on Rivik's face, the fear in his wife's eyes. Even Grigor, usually stoic, looked anxious. Anya, however, was transfixed. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she studied the artifact, her fingers tracing the patterns on its surface. "It's incredible," she murmured. "The energy it's emitting." I took a step closer, drawn by a morbid curiosity. I reached out a tentative hand, but a warning jolt of static electricity made me recoil. "Careful," Anya said, her voice sharp. "We don't know what it's capable of." I had a sudden irrational urge to throw the artifact as far away as possible, to run and never look back. But something held me back, a strange fascination. Grigor placed the artifact on the ground in the center of the room. It seemed to settle into the space as if it had found its rightful place. The artifact began to spin slowly, its light casting a mesmerizing pattern on the ceiling. The hum became a drone, a hypnotic chant that seemed to burrow into our minds. Anya's eyes glazed over, her face slack. She took a step towards the artifact, her arms outstretched as if in a trance. She touched the artifact, and a blinding flash of light filled the room. I was thrown back against the wall, the force of the blast knocking the air from my lungs. When I opened my eyes, I saw Anya lying on the ground, her body convulsing. The artifact had stopped spinning, its light dimmed. I rushed to her side. Her body was rigid, her eyes rolled back in her head. A thin stream of black liquid trickled from the corner of her mouth, and her skin had taken on a waxy paleness. Her body twitched and spasmed, but there was no response. Suddenly, the air filled with a high-pitched screeching, like nails on a chalkboard amplified 1,000-fold. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. "What the hell was that?" Grigor growled, his maul held tight. "I don't know," I whispered, my eyes scanning the shadows. "But I don't think we're alone anymore." The screeching grew closer. A dark shape flitted past the entrance to the shelter, a fleeting shadow that vanished as quickly as it appeared. "Stalkers!" Rivik hissed, his voice filled with dread. "They've come for the artifact!" Stalkers were creatures of nightmare, serpentine beings with translucent skin that blended seamlessly with their surroundings. They were drawn to sources of energy, like predators to wounded prey, and the artifact with its glow and hypnotic hum was a beacon in the darkness. "We have to barricade the door," I said, "and pray they don't find another way in." We moved quickly, piling up crates and furniture against the entrance. Grigor reinforced the barricade with scrap metal, his muscles straining with the effort. Rivik's wife and child huddled together in a corner. We could hear the stalkers slithering through the rubble outside, their movements swift and silent. The first attack came swiftly. A stalker slithered through a gap we hadn't noticed beneath the barricade. Its movements were silent, its body a sinuous ribbon of muscle and bone. Grigor reacted with speed, his maul whistling through the air as he intercepted the creature's lunge. The concrete-filled head connected with a crunch, sending the stalker back. But the blow hadn't been fatal. The creature hissed, its fangs bared in a silent snarl, and launched itself at Grigor again. The big man roared, swinging his maul in a wide arc. The stalker dodged, its body twisting and contorting like a hideous dancer. It lashed out with its tail, the barbed tip leaving a bloody gash on Grigor's arm. I fired my pistol, the blast ear-splitting in the confined space. The bullet hit the stalker in the flank, causing it to recoil with a shriek of pain. But the wound seemed superficial, the creature's translucent flesh closing around it like a healing wound. More stalkers were pouring into the shelter now, drawn by the scent of blood and the energy of the artifact. They swarmed over the barricade, their bodies a mass of translucent scales and venomous fangs. Rivik and his wife fought back, using anything they could find as weapons. Rivik wielded a broken table leg, swinging it with wild abandon, while his wife hurled shards of glass and metal. The child cowered in the corner, his cries muffled by the chaos. A stalker pounced at me, its jaws gaping wide. I rolled out of the way, narrowly avoiding its fangs. I fired my pistol again, the bullet hitting its mark, but the creature barely flinched. It coiled around my leg, its scales cold and slimy against my skin. I screamed as it sank its fangs into my calf, injecting a potent venom that sent waves of agony through my body. I grabbed a shard of metal from the floor and stabbed at the stalker's head. The creature screeched and released its grip, its body thrashing in pain. I collapsed to the ground, my leg stinging with a burning sensation. The world around me tilted and spun, the sounds of the battle fading into a distant roar. Through the haze of pain, I saw Grigor fighting valiantly, his maul causing destruction. Rivik and his wife were still holding their own, but they were tiring fast. The stalkers were persistent, their attacks becoming more frenzied as they sensed our weakening resolve. A hand grabbed my shoulder, shaking me roughly. "Drask! Drask, wake up!" I groaned, my eyes fluttering open. Grigor's face loomed over me, his features seamed with worry. "We have to go," he said, his voice urgent. I tried to push myself up, but my leg throbbed with agonizing pain. The venom was coursing through my veins, weakening my limbs. "I can't," I mumbled, my voice slurred. "I can't move." Grigor cursed, then hoisted me over his shoulder like a sack of grain. "Don't you dare die on me," he growled, his voice thick with emotion. I clung to him, my head spinning. The shelter was in chaos, the air filled with the screeches of stalkers and the desperate cries of the remaining survivors. Just as we were about to move, something caught my eye. A stalker had sunk its fangs into Anya's neck. Her eyes widened in shock and pain before glazing over. Grigor reacted instantly, his maul slamming down on the creature's head with a thump. But it was too late for Anya. Her body went limp, the life drained from her. Rivik, his face streaked with blood, grabbed his wife's and child's hands and dragged them towards a hidden panel in the back wall. Grigor followed him, carrying me like a wounded soldier. We squeezed through the narrow opening, the Stalkers' screeches growing fainter as we descended into darkness. The passage was cramped and claustrophobic. We stumbled through the darkness, guided only by the faint glow of Grigor's flashlight. Finally, we emerged into a larger space lit by a dim light. Rivik's wife collapsed to the ground, her sobs filling the cavern. He knelt beside her, his face buried in his hands. Grigor gently lowered me to the ground. "You all right, Drask?" I nodded, my teeth gritted against the pain. "Just give me a minute." It was only then, in the relative safety of the Undercity, that the full weight of Anya's death hit me. The life had been drained from her, leaving behind a husk. I looked around, taking in our surroundings. The cavern was vast, its walls lined with pipes and cables, remnants of the city's infrastructure. A network of tunnels branched off in every direction, disappearing into the darkness. "Where are we?" I asked. "The Undercity," Rivik said. "A refuge for those who have nowhere else to go." He gestured towards a group of bodies huddled in the shadows. "They're not all friendly," he warned, "but they'll leave us alone as long as we don't cause any trouble." I nodded, understanding the rules of survival in this underground world. We were intruders here, unwelcome guests in a place where trust was a currency rarely exchanged. The dwellers watched us with wary eyes, their faces hardened by the harsh realities of life underground. A few clutched crude weapons, improvised from scrap metal and broken tools. A murmur rippled through the crowd. An older woman, her face lined with wrinkles that told a story of hardship and survival, stepped forward. "You bring trouble with you," she said, her voice raspy. "The creatures, they followed you. We didn't have a choice. We were attacked. We found something in an old lab, something that drew them." "A relic," the woman said, her eyes widening. "You found a relic of the old ones." My heart skipped a beat. "You know of them?" She nodded slowly. "Our ancestors spoke of them in whispers. Relics of the old ones, they called them. Objects of power, but also of great danger." "Old ones?" Grigor asked. "The aliens," Rivik explained. "The ones who came from the stars and brought ruin upon our world." The old woman continued. "They say the old ones left these relics behind, scattered throughout the ruins of their cities. They are said to hold the secrets of their power, but also the seeds of their destruction." The artifact we had found, the object that had cost Anya her life, was a relic of the aliens. It made sense now, the way the Stalkers had been drawn to its energy. "What do you know about them?" The old woman shook her head. "We know little. Our ancestors learned to fear them, to avoid them at all costs. But some among us believe they hold the key to our salvation. If the artifact held the secrets of the aliens' power, perhaps it also held the means to defeat them." The old woman nodded. "Come," she said, beckoning us to follow. "I will show you what we know." She led us deeper into the Undercity through the tunnels. Finally, we reached a massive room. The old woman gestured towards a stack of ancient books and scrolls, their pages yellowed with age. "These are the writings of our ancestors," she said. "They may hold the answers you seek." The old woman carefully unrolled a scroll, revealing faded ink and delicate illustrations. She began to translate, her voice a low murmur that filled the chamber. "In the time before time," she began, "when the stars were young and the world was new, the old ones came from the sky. They were beings of great power, with knowledge beyond our comprehension. They came in ships that blotted out the sun, their arrival heralding an era of darkness." Her voice grew somber. "They enslaved our ancestors, twisting them to their will. It was a time of suffering and despair, a time when hope seemed lost." Grigor's hand tightened around his maul, his knuckles white. "Bastards!" he muttered, his voice thick with anger. The old woman continued. "But the old ones were not unchallenged. Their enemies, creatures from the shadows, followed them across the stars. They were drawn to the old ones' power, their technology a beacon in the darkness." She paused, her eyes shifting towards the entrance to the chamber as if expecting the creatures to burst in at any moment. The creatures attacked. They destroyed the Old Ones' cities, their machines, their very civilization. The world was engulfed in a war that lasted for centuries. "What happened to the Old Ones?" I asked. "They were wiped out," she said. "The creatures consumed them, their cities reduced to rubble. But the creatures remained lurking in the shadows, waiting for the Old Ones to return." "And the relics?" Grigor asked. "Why are they so dangerous?" "They emit a signal that attracts the creatures, drawing them like moths to a flame," the old woman explained. She paused, then added, "And where there are creatures, there is a queen." Rivik's wife gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "A queen?" The old woman nodded. "Each swarm, each colony of creatures is ruled by a queen. She is the source of their power, the heart of their colony. If the artifact you found is emitting a signal, then a queen is surely nearby." The news was devastating. If a queen was close, it meant we were in even greater danger than we had realized. We had not only awakened the creatures, but also alerted their leader to our presence. "We have to destroy the artifact," Rivik said, "before it's too late." The artifact was a curse, a weapon that could lead to our annihilation. But destroying it wouldn't be easy. It was a relic of an advanced civilization. We had to find a way to dismantle it, to neutralize its power before the queen and her swarm found us. The old woman led us further past the stacks of books and scrolls to a small alcove where herbs hung, drying from the ceiling, and rows of jars filled with concoctions lined the shelves. She examined my leg with a practiced eye, her fingers probing the swollen flesh around the bite. "The Stalker's venom is potent," she said, her voice a low murmur. "It paralyzes the muscles, slows the heart. But there are remedies." She reached for a jar containing a viscous, dark green liquid. It smelled of earth and something sharp, like crushed leaves and bitter roots. She dipped a cloth into the liquid and applied it to my wound. The pain intensified for a moment, then gradually subsided into a dull ache. "This will ease the pain and slow the venom's spread," she said, "but you will need rest." I nodded gratefully, my body already feeling the effects of the potion. Grigor, meanwhile, had a nasty gash on his arm where a stalker had raked him with its barbed tail. The old woman treated his wound as well, applying a salve that smelled of honey and beeswax. Once we were patched up, we gathered around the fire. The discussion turned to the artifact and the threat it posed. "We have to destroy it," Rivik said. "It's too dangerous to keep." Grigor nodded in agreement. "He's right. We saw what it did to Anya. We can't let it hurt anyone else." But the old woman shook her head. "Destroying it may not be so easy," she said. "The Old One's technology is resilient." A tense silence settled over the group. We were caught between the fear of the artifact's power and the desperation to find a way to use it against the creatures that haunted our world. "We have to strike back," I said. The others looked at me. "How?" Rivik asked. "We barely escaped with our lives." "The artifact," I said. "It's still back there, calling to them. And if the old stories are true, it's calling to the Queen." Grigor's eyes narrowed. "You think we should go back there? Are you mad?" "Not to retrieve it," I clarified. "We use it as a trap. The Queen will be drawn to its power. We ambush her there at the source." The idea was audacious, bordering on suicidal. But as the old woman had said, the Queen was the key. If we could take her out, the rest of the swarm might falter. "It's risky," Rivik admitted, his voice grave. "But the alternative is to wait here, hoping they don't find us. And I'd rather die fighting than cowering in the dark." "All right," Grigor said. "Let's do this." Under the old woman's guidance, we began to prepare for our audacious gambit. From the depths of the Undercity's hidden caches, we unearthed an arsenal of sorts, the tools of desperation and survival. Rusted blades, sharpened rebar, crudely fashioned spears, and scavenged tools repurposed for violence. Grigor, with his brute strength, opted for a massive sledgehammer found in the ruins of an old workshop. Its head was dented and scarred, but it still promised to deliver a devastating blow. Rivik scavenged components from broken machines, cobbling together energy shields that crackled with a faint blue light. His wife meticulously crafted traps from barbed wire and salvaged explosives. Even the old woman contributed, brewing potent elixirs from strange fungi and phosphorescent plants found in the Undercity's depths. These concoctions, she assured us, would heighten our senses, dull our pain, and grant us a temporary edge against the creature's toxins. Not everyone was content to remain behind. A handful of Undercity dwellers, weary of living in fear, volunteered to join our mission. They were hardened survivors, their skills honed by years of scavenging and fighting for their lives. Among them was a young woman named Linnea, a skilled tracker with a sharp eye and an even sharper knife. There was also an old man named Castor, a former engineer who claimed to have knowledge of the Old One's technology. His gnarled hands trembled, but his eyes burned with intelligence. With our weapons and a new purpose, we set out for our former shelter. We moved through the tunnels of the Undercity, our footsteps muffled by the damp earth. We emerged into the ruins of the city, the setting sun casting shadows across the shattered landscape. From a safe distance, we observed the scene. Stalkers patrolled the perimeter of the ruined building, their translucent forms barely visible in the fading light. We knew the Queen must be close. The intensity of the artifact's call, the heightened activity of the Stalkers, it all pointed to her presence. "There," Linnea whispered, pointing towards a figure silhouetted against the entrance of the shelter. It wasn't the monstrous figure I'd expected. Slender, almost graceful, the Queen was a mass of sensory organs, tentacles, and twitching antennae that sprouted from a head too large for her stretched body. It was a grotesque alien beauty, a creature that seemed to embody both intelligence and instinct. "By the stars!" Rivik breathed, his voice barely a whisper. But fear quickly gave way to a grim determination. This was the heart of the hive, the source of our torment. If we could take her down, we could cripple the swarm, maybe even turn the tide of this war. A silent exchange of hardened gazes passed between us. Grigor hefted his maul, Linnea tested the edge of her blade, and Castor adjusted his goggles. The time for whispers and fear was over. It was time to hunt the hunter. Just as we were about to move, a wave of figures emerged from the shadows. Dozens of Undercity dwellers, armed with an assortment of weapons, had answered our unspoken call. They carried blades forged from salvaged metal, sharpened pikes and crossbows fashioned from salvaged parts. "We have had enough of hiding," a deep voice boomed from the crowd. "We will fight for our home!" A cheer erupted. We were no longer a small band of survivors, but a united force, an army ready to take back what had been stolen from us. The old woman stepped forward. "May the spirits of our ancestors guide your blades," she said, her voice filled with a quiet power. "May the darkness tremble before your wrath." With a shared nod, we moved out, our small army winding its way through the tunnels towards our former shelter. We crouched behind the ruins, our eyes fixed on the shelter. The Stalkers were still there, their bodies squirming, their attention focused on the artifact. Rivik signaled to his wife. She nodded, her fingers tightening around a small, spherical object. She tossed it towards the shelter. It landed with a muffled thud, rolling a few feet before coming to a rest. A moment of silence and then a blinding flash erupted. The ground shook beneath our feet, and chunks of rubble rained down around us. When the dust settled, the shelter was a smouldering ruin. The Stalkers, caught in the blast, were scattered and disoriented. We seized the opportunity, charging forward with a battle cry. The fight was brutal and bloody. The Stalkers were fast and agile, their venomous fangs and barbed tails a constant threat. But we fought with the fury of the desperate, our weapons flashing as we cut them down. Grigor swung his maul with devastating force, crushing skulls and shattering bones. Linnea darted between the stalkers, her blade flashing as she disemboweled them. Revik's traps unleashed a hail of shrapnel and barbed wire, ensnaring the creatures and slowing their advance. Despite our efforts, the stalkers continued to pour from the ruins, their numbers seemingly endless. As the battle raged, I caught a glimpse of movement in the heart of the chaos. It was the Queen. She towered over her minions, her tentacles snaking, her antennae twitching. With a roar, Grigor charged towards the Queen, his maul raised high. The rest of us followed, our weapons drawn. The Queen shrieked, a sound like tearing metal that pierced the night and sent a fresh wave of terror through the remaining stalkers. She lashed out with her tentacles, each one tipped with a razor-sharp barb. Grigor met her charge head-on, his maul whistling through the air as he aimed for her head. But the Queen was faster than she looked. She swayed back, her tentacles coiling around Grigor's weapon and yanking it from his grasp. With a flick, she sent the maul flying into the darkness. Before Grigor could recover, she charged forward, her claws raking across his chest. The big man roared in pain, blood welling up between his fingers as he clutched at the deep gashes. Linnea leaped to his aid, her blade a silver arc in the moonlight. She slashed at the Queen's neck, drawing a hiss of pain from the creature. But the Queen's tentacles were already lashing out, wrapping around Linnea's arm and pulling her off balance. I rushed forward, my pistol booming. The bullets bounced harmlessly off the Queen's hide, but they seemed to distract her momentarily. Linnea used the opportunity to break free, rolling away just as the Queen's claws sliced through the air where she had been a moment before. Suddenly, a cry of terror pierced the chaos. I turned to see one of the Undercity dwellers, his eyes wide with madness, turning on his own comrades. He swung his sword wildly, cutting down two of his fellow fighters before being overwhelmed by the others. I felt a cold dread settle in the pit of my stomach. The Queen was using her telepathic powers, sowing discord and turning our own people against us. Another dweller screamed, his face contorted in agony as he clutched at his head. He stumbled blindly, his eyes filled with a terrifying emptiness, before throwing himself into the fray, attacking both friend and foe alike. The chaos spread, our ranks fracturing as the Queen's insidious influence took hold. Friends turned on friends, their minds twisted into a maelstrom of fear and hatred. Rivik, his eyes filled with horror, stumbled back from the melee, blood staining his clothes. "She's in our heads," he gasped. "She's turning us against each other." The Queen's psychic tendrils probed my mind, seeking out my deepest fears and insecurities. I fought against her, but her presence was overwhelming. With a supreme effort of will, I pushed back, my grip tightening on my pistol. I aimed at the Queen, my finger tightening on the trigger, but as I fired, a stalker jumped in front of her, taking the bullet meant for its master. The Queen shrieked again, a sound that sent a fresh wave of madness through our ranks. Grigor, his chest slick with blood, staggered back from the Queen's assault. His eyes burned with a ferocious light, the embers of a warrior's spirit refusing to be extinguished. With a roar, he surged forward once more, his maul raised high. The Queen, momentarily distracted by the chaos of the battle, turned to face him, her tentacles writhing in anticipation of another kill. Grigor put all his remaining strength into a single, devastating blow. The maul connected with the Queen's head. The Queen stumbled, a shrill cry escaping her misshapen jaws. Before Grigor could land another blow, the Queen's tentacles lashed out, piercing his flesh and lifting him bodily into the air. His maul clattered to the ground, his lifeblood spilling onto the dust-covered earth. His sacrifice was not in vain. Grigor's attack had bought us a precious few seconds, a window of opportunity that we seized with fury. We surged forward, a wave of ragged humanity crashing against the monstrous Queen. We swarmed over her, our blades flashing, our weapons finding purchase in her vulnerable flesh. Linnea drove her knife deep into the Queen's eye, eliciting a shriek of agony. Caster plunged a sharpened spike into the base of one of her antennae. Rivik, his wife, clinging to his back, used his energy shield to deflect the Queen's telepathic attacks, creating a haven of sanity amidst the chaos. The Queen thrashed, her tentacles lashing out blindly, her claws raking across our bodies. But we were too many, our fury too great. We clung to her like parasites, hacking, slashing and stabbing with everything we had. Finally, with a shriek that travelled through the ruins, the Queen collapsed, her body falling limp. The remaining Stalkers, sensing their Queen's demise, scattered into the night, their cries fading into the distance. The battle was over. We had won. But victory was bittersweet. We had lost many good people, their lives sacrificed in the fight for survival. Grigor's broken body lay amidst the carnage, a mute witness to the consequences of our stand. We gathered around him, our heads bowed in silent mourning. The old woman spoke a few words in a language I didn't understand. We buried the dead under the dim light of the Undercity. No grand speeches, no prayers, just the scrape of shovels against rock and the hollow thump of dirt hitting coffins improvised from scrap metal. Grigor was laid to rest with his maul by his side, a warrior to the end. The artifact was sealed away in the deepest chamber of the Undercity. Perhaps one day, when the wounds of this night had scarred over, we would return to it, seeking answers, seeking a way to turn the tide against the creatures once and for all. But that day was not this day. We were battered, broken, our numbers dwindled. The survivors of the Undercity and those of us who had come from above, we banded together, our shared loss a grim glue that held us tight. Rivik's wife took charge of the remaining children, her motherly instincts sharpened by the harsh realities of our world. Rivik worked alongside the other survivors, fortifying our new home against the inevitable return of the Stalkers. Linnea and I, both bearing the scars of battle, became silent partners, our shared pain forging a bond that needed no words. We patrolled the tunnels, our senses honed, our weapons always at the ready. The Queen's death had not brought peace, only a brief respite. The Stalkers still prowled the surface. But we were no longer prey. We were hunters, hardened by loss and driven by a thirst for revenge. In the Undercity, I found a new purpose. I trained the others in combat, taught them the skills I had learned in the wasteland. I shared the knowledge I had gleaned from the old woman's books, the whispers of a forgotten civilization. I became a leader, not by choice but by necessity. I bore the weight of our survival on my shoulders, a burden made heavier by the memories of those we had lost. I would not rest until the last Stalker was eradicated, until the threat of the old ones was extinguished. This I swore, on the graves of the fallen and the hopes of the living.